On a crisp autumn afternoon, young Nathan Chen walked into the downtown subway station, his backpack heavy with chess books and a gleaming trophy from the day's tournament. The 12-year-old had just won second place, and his heart was still soaring from his achievement. The familiar scent of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, making his stomach rumble. The subway restaurant was busy, filled with the usual after-school crowd. Nathan patiently stood in line, counting the coins in his pocket that he'd saved from his weekly allowance. He'd been dreaming about their Italian herb and cheese bread all day, a little reward for his hard work at the chess tournament. As he approached the counter, a new worker named Derek Matthews glanced up from the sandwich he was preparing. The moment their eyes met, Nathan noticed something change in the man's expression. Derek's face hardened, his jaw tightening as if he tasted something bitter. "Get to the back of the line," Derek snapped, even though Nathan was already properly waiting his turn. "But sir, I am in line," Nathan replied softly, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's bustling noise. He clutched his trophy closer to his chest, suddenly feeling very small. Without warning, Derek stepped out from behind the counter, his face flushed with unreasonable anger. "I said, get to the back," he growled, roughly pushing Nathan aside. The force of the shove sent the boy stumbling backward, his precious trophy clattering to the ground. The bronze figure broke into pieces, scattering across the floor like broken dreams. The other customers gasped. An elderly woman rushed to help Nathan up, while a college student started recording the incident on her phone. Through it all, Derek continued muttering under his breath, using words that made several parents cover their children's ears. Nathan's hands trembled as he picked up the pieces of his trophy. His eyes stung with tears, but he fought them back, remembering what his father always told him about staying strong in the face of ignorance. With shaking fingers, he pulled out his phone and pressed his father's number on speed dial. His father was in the middle of an important meeting at the state capitol, but he always had his phone nearby for Nathan. 3 rings later, a warm, familiar voice answered, "Hey, champion. How did the tournament go?" Nathan's voice cracked as he tried to explain what had happened. The warmth in his father's voice turned to steel as he listened. What Derek Matthews didn't know, what he couldn't have known when he decided to act on his prejudices, was that Nathan's father was more than just another concerned parent. Just 6 months ago, he had been sworn in as the state's governor, making history as the first black governor in the state's history. He had worked his way up from humble beginnings, fighting against prejudice and bias every step of the way. He had always taught Nathan that their family's position came with responsibility, not privilege. As Nathan finished telling his story, the subway restaurant had gone quiet. The manager, alerted by the commotion, had already stepped in and was profusely apologizing. But the damage was done. The video was already being shared on social media, and witnesses were sharing their accounts of what they'd seen. That evening, as Nathan sat in his father's office, holding the broken pieces of his trophy, he didn't feel like a victim. Instead, he felt a strange sort of determination. His father had always told him that sometimes the worst moments could lead to the most important changes. Looking at the broken trophy in his hands, Nathan wondered if this might be one of those moments. Little did Derek Matthews know, but his actions that afternoon would set in motion a chain of events that would change not just his own life, but the lives of many others in ways he could never have imagined. The security cameras had captured everything, and soon the world would see exactly what had transpired in that subway restaurant on what had started as an ordinary autumn afternoon. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. As Nathan finally let his tears fall in the safety of his father's office, outside the windows of the state capitol, the autumn sun was setting on a day that would be remembered as the catalyst for something much bigger than a broken trophy and a biased subway worker. The aftermath of the incident spread like wildfire through social media. By nightfall, the video had already reached thousands of views, with people sharing their outrage and support for young Nathan. The security footage from the subway restaurant showed the incident from multiple angles, leaving no room for doubt about what had happened. In the governor's mansion, Nathan sat quietly doing his homework while his father made several important phone calls. The governor was known for his calm demeanor, even in the most challenging situations. Tonight was no different. He spoke softly but firmly as he contacted the subway restaurant's corporate headquarters, local civil rights organizations, and his trusted advisors. "Dad, Nathan called out during a break between calls, "Are you going to tell everyone you're my father?" His father put down his phone and walked over to where Nathan was sitting. He pulled up a chair and looked at his son thoughtfully. "You know, sometimes the best way to handle things isn't by using power or position. What happened today was wrong, not because you're the governor's son, but because no child should ever be treated that way." Meanwhile, across town, Derek Matthews was finishing his shift at the Subway restaurant. His manager had already given him a stern warning and sent him home early. As he walked to his car, his phone buzzed continuously with notifications. The video had started circulating in local community groups, and people were beginning to recognize him. It wasn't until he got home and turned on the evening news that the full weight of his actions began to sink in. There, on his small TV screen, was a clip of Nathan at a recent public event, standing proudly next to his father, the governor. Derek's face turned pale as he watched the footage, his hands shaking as he reached for the remote to turn up the volume. The news anchor was discussing the incident without revealing Nathan's connection to the governor, but local social media groups had already made the connection. Derek sat on his worn couch, his head in his hands, as he realized the magnitude of his actions. Back at the governor's mansion, Nathan's father was handling the situation with characteristic grace. He had already declined several major news networks' requests for interviews, choosing instead to focus on how this incident could lead to positive change. "Nathan," he said, sitting down with his son for a late dinner, "remember when we talked about turning problems into opportunities?" Nathan nodded, picking at his food. "Well, this is one of those times. What happened today wasn't just about you. It happens to people every day who don't have the platform we have to speak up about it." The next morning, the governor's office issued a brief statement, not as a father, but as a state leader concerned about discrimination in public spaces. The statement didn't mention Nathan or their relationship, instead focusing on the broader issue of racial bias and the need for better training and awareness in customer service industries. At school, Nathan's classmates rallied around him. His chess club teammates wore black and white ribbons in solidarity, and his teachers made sure he felt supported. The incident had sparked important conversations in classrooms across the city about respect, dignity, and standing up against discrimination. Derek's life had turned upside down overnight. His apartment phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comments. His social media accounts were flooded with messages, some expressing anger, others calling for his firing. He hadn't slept all night, replaying the incident in his mind, seeing Nathan's face as he fell, hearing the sound of the trophy breaking. The Subway franchise's corporate office announced an emergency meeting to address the situation. They were facing mounting pressure from the public, with calls for boycotts and demands for action. What they didn't know was that the governor's office had already begun drafting a proposal for mandatory anti-discrimination training for all service industry workers in the state. As the second day drew to a close, Nathan sat in his father's home office, working on a school essay about personal challenges. He looked up at his father, who was reading through some documents. "Dad," he said thoughtfully, "do you think Mr. Matthews will ever understand why what he did was wrong?" His father put down his papers and smiled gently. "Sometimes, son, people need to face the consequences of their actions to understand their impact. But more importantly, they need to be given the chance to learn and change. That's what we're going to try to make happen here." Outside, the media circus was growing. News vans lined the street near the Subway restaurant, and online discussions about the incident had gone national. But inside the governor's mansion, a father and son were turning a moment of pain into an opportunity for change, proving that sometimes the most powerful responses to prejudice come not from anger, but from wisdom and determination to make things better for everyone. The story was far from over, and the coming days would bring more challenges and revelations. But for now, Nathan and his father had laid the groundwork for something much bigger than they had initially imagined. A chance to turn an act of discrimination into a catalyst for positive change in their community and beyond. The investigation into the Subway incident kicked into high gear on the third day. The restaurant's corporate team arrived early in the morning, their faces serious as they reviewed security footage and interviewed staff members. The small restaurant, usually buzzing with hungry customers, was unusually quiet. Behind the scenes, the governor's office worked methodically, gathering evidence and documenting similar incidents that had occurred across the state. Nathan's father had assembled a small, dedicated team to look into discrimination cases in customer service settings. Their findings were troubling. Nathan's experience wasn't an isolated incident. "Look at these numbers," one team member said, spreading papers across the conference table. "In the past year alone, we've had hundreds of reported cases of discrimination in public spaces, and these are just the ones that got reported." Meanwhile, Nathan was back at school, trying to maintain his normal routine despite the growing attention. His chess club was preparing for another tournament, and his coach had given him a replacement trophy. But something had changed in the young boy. He found himself paying more attention to how people treated each other, noticing small acts of kindness and instances of unfairness he might have missed before. During lunch break, he overheard some classmates discussing the viral video. "My mom says the worker might lose his job," one student said. Nathan felt a mix of emotions hearing this. He didn't want revenge, but he did want change. At the Subway restaurant, the corporate investigation team interviewed everyone who had been present during the incident. The elderly woman who had helped Nathan up gave a detailed account of what she'd witnessed. The college student who recorded the video shared the original footage, which was even clearer than the security camera version. Derek Matthews sat in a small office facing the investigation team. His hands fidgeted with a paper cup of water as he tried to explain his actions. I don't know what came over me," he stammered. "I've never done anything like this before." The investigators weren't impressed. They had uncovered previous complaints about Derek's behavior, though none as serious as this one. Customer feedback forms from the past few months showed a pattern of rudeness, particularly toward minority customers. Back at the state capitol, Nathan's father was meeting with civil rights leaders and business representatives. The discussion centered on creating meaningful change rather than just punitive measures. "We need to address the root cause," said a community leader, her voice firm but compassionate. "Firing one person won't solve the bigger problem. We need systematic changes in how we train and educate service workers." The governor agreed. He shared his vision for a new state program that would require anti-discrimination training for all customer-facing employees. The program would include real-world scenarios, cultural sensitivity workshops, and ongoing education. Late that afternoon, Nathan visited his father's office after chess practice. He found him surrounded by reports and proposals. "How's it going, Dad?" he asked, dropping his backpack by the door. His father looked up with tired but determined eyes. "Sometimes, son, doing the right thing takes time and patience. We're not just trying to punish someone, we're trying to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The investigation team's preliminary findings arrived that evening. They confirmed what the video had shown, clear evidence of discriminatory behavior. But they also revealed something more concerning: a lack of proper training and oversight in many franchise locations. Local community groups began organizing peaceful demonstrations outside the Subway restaurant. They carried signs promoting unity and respect, turning the incident into a rallying point for positive change. Nathan watched the news coverage with his father, feeling both proud and slightly overwhelmed by how big the story had become. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think anything will really change?" His father pulled him close. "Change happens one person at a time, one situation at a time. What matters is how we handle these moments when they come." As night fell, the investigation team prepared their final report. Their recommendations would go beyond just this one incident, suggesting sweeping changes in how service industry workers are trained and supervised. They also recommended a series of community meetings to bridge the gap between local businesses and the people they serve. The day ended with a sense of progress, but everyone involved knew this was just the beginning. The real work, the hard work of changing hearts and minds, was still ahead. As Nathan went to bed that night, he thought about Derek Matthews, hoping that somehow something good would come from this difficult situation. The investigation had revealed not just what happened that day in the Subway restaurant, but a deeper problem that needed addressing. It showed how one moment of prejudice could spark a movement for change, and how even painful experiences could lead to positive transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for now, the groundwork had been laid for something important: a chance to turn an ugly incident into a stepping stone toward a more inclusive and understanding community. Local community groups began organizing peaceful demonstrations outside the Subway restaurant. They carried signs promoting unity and respect, turning the incident into a rallying point for positive change. Nathan watched the news coverage with his father, feeling both proud and slightly overwhelmed by how big the story had become. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think anything will really change?" His father pulled him close. "Change happens one person at a time, one situation at a time. What matters is how we handle these moments when they come." As night fell, the investigation team prepared their final report. Their recommendations would go beyond just this one incident, suggesting sweeping changes in how service industry workers are trained and supervised. They also recommended a series of community meetings to bridge the gap between local businesses and the people they serve. The day ended with a sense of progress, but everyone involved knew this was just the beginning. The real work, the hard work of changing hearts and minds, was still ahead. As Nathan went to bed that night, he thought about Derek Matthews, hoping that somehow something good would come from this difficult situation. The investigation had revealed not just what happened that day in the Subway restaurant, but a deeper problem that needed addressing. It showed how one moment of prejudice could spark a movement for change, and how even painful experiences could lead to positive transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for now, the groundwork had been laid for something important. A chance to turn an ugly incident into a stepping stone toward a more inclusive and understanding community. The revelation hit Derek Matthews like a thunderbolt on a clear day. He was sitting in his small apartment, scrolling through social media when he saw it. A photo of Nathan standing proudly beside his father at a recent state function. The caption read, "Governor's son victim of racial discrimination at local Subway restaurant." His phone slipped from his trembling hands onto the worn carpet. The full weight of his actions crashed down on him as memories of that day played over and over in his mind. The push, the broken trophy, the look in the boy's eyes. It all took on a new, horrifying significance. He rushed to his laptop, frantically searching for more information. Every news site seemed to be covering the story. Some headlines focused on the incident itself, while others discussed the governor's measured response and plans for systematic change. Derek's chest tightened as he read comment after comment condemning his actions. "What have I done?" he whispered to his empty apartment. The ticking of his wall clock seemed deafening in the silence. At work, his coworkers had been giving him the cold shoulder for days. Now he understood why they kept sharing knowing looks. His manager had called him into the office that morning, explaining that he would be placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's completion. "You know," his manager had said, "that boy comes in here sometimes with his father. They're always polite, always patient. The governor even remembers everyone's names." The words had seemed odd at the time, but now they stung like salt in an open wound. Derek spent the afternoon pacing his apartment, his mind racing. He thought about his own upbringing, the prejudices he never questioned, the assumptions he'd made without thinking. The face of his grandmother appeared in his thoughts, a woman who had always taught him to judge people by their character, not their appearance. He had failed her teaching spectacularly. Later that evening his phone rang. It was his sister, calling from 3 states away. "I saw the news," she said softly. "Derek, what were you thinking?" He couldn't answer. What could he say? How could he explain something he himself couldn't understand? "Remember when we were kids," his sister continued, "and that store owner accused you of shoplifting just because you wore ripped jeans? Remember how that felt? And now you've done the same thing to someone else's child." Her words hit home. Derek sank onto his couch, memories of that humiliating childhood incident flooding back. He had sworn then that he would never make anyone else feel that way, yet here he was, having done exactly that to a 12-year-old boy. The next morning, Derek received an email from the corporate investigation team. They wanted to meet with him again, this time to discuss restorative measures. The formal language scared him, but he knew he had to face whatever was coming. As he prepared for the meeting, he caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at him seemed older, tired, burdened with the weight of his actions. He straightened his tie, trying to look presentable, professional, trying to look like someone who could learn from their mistakes. The corporate office was quiet when he arrived. In the meeting room, he faced not just the investigation team, but also representatives from local community organizations. They had a proposal for him. a chance to participate in an intensive sensitivity training program and community service project. This isn't just about punishment, one of the community leaders explained. It's about growth and understanding. Are you willing to learn? Derek nodded, his throat too tight to speak. For the first time since the incident, he felt a tiny spark of hope. Not hope for keeping his job or avoiding consequences, but hope that he could become a better person. As he left the meeting, he passed a wall of local news clippings. There was a photo of the governor and Nathan at a community event, both smiling warmly at the camera. Derek stopped and stared at it for a long moment. The boy's smile was genuine, open, trusting, everything that Derek's actions could have destroyed. That evening, he sat down at his small kitchen table and began to write. He wrote 2 letters, one to Nathan and one to his father. He poured out his regret, his shame, and his commitment to change. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew he hadn't earned that yet. Instead, he promised to learn from his mistake and to work toward being the kind of person who would make his grandmother proud. As he sealed the envelopes, Derek thought about how one moment of prejudice had changed so many lives, his own included. The governor's identity had been a shocking revelation, but the real revelation was seeing the ugliness of his own prejudice reflected back at him through the eyes of a child. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons to learn. But for the first time since the incident, Derek felt ready to face them. The revelation of Nathan's identity hadn't just exposed his mistake, it had opened a door to transformation if he was brave enough to walk through it. The world outside his window was growing dark, but somewhere in that darkness, a path to redemption was waiting. It would be a long journey, but it had to start somewhere. And for Derek Matthews, it started with accepting the truth about himself and committing to change. As the story spread across social media and news outlets, the public response grew into something much bigger than anyone had expected. The video of the incident had touched a nerve, sparking conversations in homes, schools, and workplaces across the state. Local news stations camped outside the Subway restaurant, their vans lined up along the street like a parade. Inside, business had slowed to a trickle as people chose to eat elsewhere. The few customers who did come in often paused to take pictures, treating the location like a landmark of social injustice. "It could have been any of our children," said a mother during a community meeting at the local library. The room was packed with concerned citizens, all eager to share their stories and suggestions for change. "We need to make sure this never happens again." The governor's office was flooded with letters and emails. Some shared similar experiences of discrimination, while others offered support and suggestions. Nathan's father read each one carefully, noting patterns and gathering ideas for his proposed legislation. At Nathan's school, teachers used the incident as a teaching moment. His history teacher led a thoughtful discussion about civil rights and everyday discrimination. Students shared their own experiences, many speaking up for the first time about moments that had made them feel small or unwelcome. "I never told anyone before," one student admitted during the discussion, "but something similar happened to me at a store last year. I was too scared to say anything." Social media buzzed with hashtags supporting Nathan and calling for change. Local artists created powerful artwork depicting the incident, which spread rapidly online. One particular drawing showed a broken trophy transforming into a bridge between communities. The Subway Corporation's corporate office finally broke their silence with a comprehensive statement. They announced mandatory sensitivity training for all employees nationwide, using this incident as a case study. They also pledged to create a scholarship fund for minority students interested in business management. Local businesses began posting "All are welcome here" signs in their windows. The movement spread beyond just the incident itself, becoming a catalyst for broader conversations about respect and equality in customer service. Nathan's father received invitation after invitation to speak about the incident. He declined most of them, choosing instead to focus on creating real change through policy. "Words are important," he told his staff, "but actions matter more." During a rare public statement, he addressed the media without mentioning his personal connection to the case. "This incident has shown us that we still have work to do," he said, his voice steady and determined. "But it has also shown us how many people are ready to stand up for what's right." The local chess club organized a special tournament in Nathan's honor, themed around unity and respect. Players from all over the state came to participate, making it the largest chess event the city had ever seen. "This isn't just about chess," the club president announced at the opening ceremony. "It's about creating spaces where everyone feels valued and respected." Online support groups formed, connecting people who had faced similar discrimination. They shared stories, offered advice, and worked together to document and report incidents of bias. What had started as one boy's terrible experience was becoming a movement for change. Local universities reached out to offer workshops on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. Business owners, service workers, and community members filled the lecture halls, eager to learn and improve. A group of high school students started a Respect campaign, visiting local businesses to talk about customer service and inclusion. They wore T-shirts with the simple message, "Treat others as you want your children treated." The elderly woman who had helped Nathan that day became something of a local hero. She spoke at community meetings, sharing her perspective as someone who had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature in that moment. "I saw hatred that day," she would say, "but I also saw people immediately stand up against it. That's what gives me hope." At home, Nathan and his father continued their evening talks, processing everything that was happening. "Dad," Nathan asked one night, "do you think all this attention will make things better?" His father thought carefully before answering. "Change doesn't happen overnight, son, but when people come together like this, when they really want things to be better, that's when real progress begins." The subway incident had become more than just a viral video or a news story. It had become a mirror, reflecting back to the community its own prejudices and potential for change. People weren't just angry about what had happened to Nathan, they were determined to prevent it from happening to anyone else. As the fifth day drew to a close, the movement showed no signs of slowing down. What had started as a shocking example of discrimination had transformed into something powerful, a catalyst for change, a call to action, and a reminder that every person's dignity matters. The broken trophy still sat on Nathan's desk, but now it seemed less like a symbol of hatred and more like a turning point, the moment when one community decided it was time for real change. The pieces might never be put back together, but something new and potentially more valuable was being built in its place. The resolution phase of the incident began to take shape as autumn leaves turned golden. The governor's office had finished drafting a comprehensive anti-discrimination bill, drawing from the hundreds of stories and suggestions that had poured in from across the state. Early morning sunlight streamed through the Capitol building's windows as Nathan's father presented the proposed legislation. The room was packed with lawmakers, community leaders, and citizens who had come to witness this moment. The bill, titled the Customer Dignity Act, outlined mandatory training programs and clear consequences for discriminatory behavior in public spaces. "This isn't just about one incident," the governor explained, his voice carrying through the chamber. "It's about making sure every person who walks into a business feels respected and valued." Meanwhile, at the Subway restaurant's corporate headquarters, major changes were already underway. They had hired diversity consultants to completely overhaul their training programs. The new curriculum included real-world scenarios, role-playing exercises, and regular refresher courses for all employees. Derek Matthews, who had been on administrative leave, was given a choice. He could either leave the company or participate in an intensive rehabilitation program that included community service and anti-bias training. To everyone's surprise, he chose the harder path. "I want to learn," he told the corporate team. "I want to be part of the solution, not the problem." His voice trembled but held determination. The training program wasn't easy. Derek spent weeks attending workshops, listening to stories of discrimination and confronting his own biases. He worked alongside community organizations, serving meals at local shelters and helping with youth programs. One day, while volunteering at a community center, an elderly man approached him. "I saw you on the news," the man said, "but I see something different in your eyes now." Derek felt tears welling up, touched by the man's willingness to see beyond his past actions. Back at school, Nathan was thriving. The chess club had grown significantly, attracting students from all backgrounds. They had started a mentorship program, pairing experienced players with beginners, creating bonds that went beyond the chessboard. The governor's office received word that several other states were interested in adopting similar legislation. What had started as a local incident was sparking change across the country. News outlets began running stories about other communities implementing their own training programs, inspired by their example. During a quiet evening at home, Nathan's father shared some news with his son. "The bill passed today," he said softly, "but something else happened too. Mr. Matthews asked if he could speak to us." Nathan thought carefully before responding. "What do you think, Dad?" "I think sometimes people deserve a chance to make things right," his father replied. "But it's your decision too." The meeting was arranged in the governor's office. Derek entered nervously, clutching a small package. Inside was a new chess trophy, along with a handwritten letter of apology. But more meaningful than the gift was the change visible in his demeanor, the genuine remorse and commitment to change. "I can't undo what I did," Derek said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can spend the rest of my life working to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." The governor's new law went into effect the following month. Businesses across the state began implementing the required training programs. The Subway franchise where the incident occurred became a model location, hosting workshops and sharing their experiences with other businesses. Local schools incorporated elements of the training into their curriculum, teaching students about respect, dignity, and standing up against discrimination. Nathan's story became part of these lessons, though many students didn't realize the quiet boy in their chess club was the same one from the story. The community center where Derek volunteered offered him a part-time position coordinating their youth programs. He accepted, seeing it as another step in his journey toward redemption. The kids who came to the center didn't know his past. They just knew him as the kind man who taught them about respect and fair play. As winter approached, Nathan's father held a small ceremony to sign the final implementation orders for the new law. Nathan sat in the front row, watching proudly as his father's pen moved across the paper. The broken trophy still sat on his desk at home, but it no longer represented pain or anger. Instead, it had become a symbol of how broken things could lead to positive change. The resolution wasn't perfect, no real-world solution ever is, but it was meaningful and far-reaching. It showed how one moment of darkness could lead to lasting light, how one person's mistake could become everyone's opportunity to learn and grow. As Nathan packed up his chess pieces that evening, he noticed a new feeling in the air. It wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It was about building something better, one move at a time. 1 year had passed since the incident at the Subway restaurant. The autumn air carried the same crispness, but everything else had changed. The city had transformed, not just in policies and procedures, but in the way people treated each other. On a quiet Sunday morning, Derek Matthews stood before a crowd at the community center's annual Unity celebration. His hands trembled slightly as he held the microphone, but his voice was steady. "A year ago, I was a different person," he began. "I made a terrible mistake that opened my eyes to the darkness inside me, but it also showed me the light in others." In the audience, Nathan sat beside his father, listening intently. The young boy had grown taller over the year, and more confident too. His chess trophy collection had expanded, but the broken one still held a special place on his shelf. The community center buzzed with activity. People from all walks of life had gathered to celebrate the changes that had taken place. The Customer Dignity Act had been fully implemented across the state, and its effects were visible everywhere. Businesses displayed certificates showing their employees had completed the required training, but more importantly, there was a noticeable shift in how people interacted. Derek's transformation had been remarkable. After completing his training and community service, he had become an advocate for change. He traveled to other cities, sharing his story and helping implement similar programs. His journey from perpetrator to teacher had touched many lives. "The hardest part," Derek continued, his voice softening, "wasn't facing public criticism or losing my job. It was facing myself in the mirror and acknowledging my prejudices. But the community didn't just condemn me, they helped me learn and grow." The governor's office had received national recognition for their handling of the incident. Instead of letting it divide the community, they had used it as a catalyst for unity. Other states had begun adopting similar legislation, creating a ripple effect of positive change. Nathan's Chess Club had become a model of inclusion. They now hosted monthly community tournaments where people of all ages and backgrounds came together. The games were about more than just winning. They were about building bridges and understanding. After the speeches, people mingled over refreshments. The elderly woman who had helped Nathan that day was there too, now running a mentorship program for young people. Sometimes, she told a group of listeners, the worst moments bring out the best in us. Derek approached Nathan and his father cautiously. Although they had met several times over the year for various community events, these moments still carried weight. "I want you to know," he said, looking at Nathan, "that you didn't just change my life. You helped change thousands of lives." Nathan smiled, a genuine warm smile that showed wisdom beyond his years. "We all did it together," he replied. The local Subway restaurant had become a symbol of transformation. The same location where the incident occurred now hosted monthly community dialogue sessions. The walls displayed artwork created by local students, celebrating diversity and respect. As the celebration continued, people shared stories of how the past year had changed them. Business owners talked about the positive impact of the training programs. Students discussed how their perspectives had shifted. Community leaders shared plans for expanding their initiatives. Nathan's father took the stage last. He spoke not as the governor, but as a father who had watched his son's pain become a force for good. "A year ago, we saw how quickly hatred can surface," he said, "but we also saw how love and understanding can transform it." As the sun set on the celebration, Nathan and his father walked home together. The streets looked the same, but everything felt different. Store owners waved warmly from their shops. People greeted each other with genuine smiles. "Dad," Nathan said, stopping to look at the Subway restaurant as they passed, "do you think we really made a difference?" His father looked at the "All are welcome" sign in the window, at the diverse group of people inside enjoying their meals, at the community bulletin board filled with notices for unity events and training sessions. "Look around, son," he replied softly. "Sometimes the biggest changes happen so gradually we barely notice them. But they're real. Every smile, every kind word, every person who chooses to learn and grow, it all matters." They continued their walk home in comfortable silence, passing by people whose lives had been touched by the events of the past year. The broken trophy still sat on Nathan's shelf, but it no longer represented pain or anger. Instead, it had become a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful transformations start with a moment of breaking. As they reached home, the evening sky painted everything in soft colors. The world wasn't perfect. There was still work to be done. But in this corner of it, people had learned that change was possible, that hearts could grow, and that even the darkest moments could lead to light. The story of the Subway incident would be told for years to come, not as a tale of hatred, but as a testament to the power of transformation, understanding, and the unwavering spirit of a community that chose to rise above prejudice and build something better together.